Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. The Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and yes, I brought out the dusting glove again, as I have something very shiny to show you today, and I'm sure you already know quite well what this is. It's another knife from the Taylor's Eyewitness Premier Collection, this one, of course, being another Barlow. Now, this is in a material that has quite the legendary status in the knife community, Ramshorn. And I'll get into why that is in a moment. But, as always, this comes in the traditional Taylor's Eyewitness embossed cardboard box. This is in Ramshorn. And this was purchased at fendrihon.ca. There is also fendrihon.com for my American friends. Very nice shipping time, usually around 2 to 5 days from Ontario to Alberta. And also, this knife was purchased in the midst of a 10% off Valentine's sale, so you can enjoy that for a couple more days. It does come with this little pamphlet with your Taylor's Eyewitness description. You can read that if you'd like. Your care instructions as well. And this is a knife made by Andrew Smith. So, there you are. Now, the knife itself. This one's going to be a little bit hard to deal with when it comes to the light, and that's part of the reason I have this green mat here, this velvet backdrop. But here is the knife, and I actually have a light here. It might be terribly reflective, but you can see the material here is not showing up on camera very well. But this is Ramshorn. And it's often described as having a certain buttery translucence. And that was a phrase coined by the great Slick Slicers, who I believe still has the largest collection of these Taylor's Eyewitness Barlows to date, that I know of, for that matter. But here is the knife, and it's your traditional Taylor's Eyewitness Barlow, with the square, polished bolster. Everything on these is incredibly shiny. You have the stamped Eyewitness logo. Very, very crisp and clear. Eyewitness, Sheffield, England. You have your square tang, which is very nice. Brass liners on this, which are, of course, very well polished. And a steel spring. And don't worry, we'll get to that. The pins are also polished brass. And the handles are this beautiful Ramshorn. Now, forgive these little scratches here. These actually have occurred since I received the knife. As it turns out, Ramshorn is very easy to scratch, and therefore must be handled with significant care. The material is living up to the name of translucent, as you can actually see the pins all the way through the material, which is very unusual, but quite nice. When compared to the other example of Ramshorn I have, or Ramshorn, I of course have two knives from Joseph Tamer, which are very nice knives, but quite a bit less impressive when compared to this. And that material is, again, buttery smooth, beautifully polished, and it's also quite generous too. I noticed that Andrew tends to leave a lot of material on his handles, offering a very chunky grip in the hand. And I know some prefer the Barlows by Lee White, which are a bit more rounded and thin. I tend to prefer, well, neither one over the other. I think they're both very, very nice. We'll put that aside for now. Here is another Barlow by Andrew Smith. This one has file work and is in buffalo horn. Although in terms of the general colorization, I much prefer the detailed look of this Ramshorn. The colorations are very hard to pick up on camera, but you have a lot of gray, a lot of white, and even a tiny, tiny little bit of orange here. Again, I will attempt to show that a little bit more with the light. But the material has this almost honey coloration. It's very, very beautiful. but take this aside. So in terms of fit and finish, this knife is not perfect. The transitions are pretty good, considering, again, this knife was perfect when it was new. Does further back my theory that temperature and dry climates, such as the ones here in Alberta, certainly do affect a knife, and that is true. So I think the material does swell and shrink, as wood also might. So certainly good transitions. The pins aren't sticking up uncomfortably, and the bolster transition is quite good, if not perfect. There's a little gap there. The blade is actually almost completely centered, and then if I push it, it is centered. So very nice. There's a lot of blade here. You can, of course, pinch these, but there's a well-ground nail nick too. This is the strongest spring on a Taylor's Barlow that I have yet to encounter. I'd put this close to a 7, maybe 7.5, and Taylor's Barlows are never terribly stiff. They're snappy, but not outrageous. And of course we have the beautiful mirror polished clip point blade. This one being a very aggressive model, tapering down to an incredibly fine point. And again, this is 420HC steel as far as I know, so not the best steel in the world, but certainly more than acceptable for what this really is. It's not a hard use knife, but more of a gentleman's or collector's item. The measurements on these are quite typically the same, even though each knife is slightly different. Just over 6 inches overall length, with a blade of 2 3/4 and a cutting edge of just under 2.5. So, as I always say, I am no lawyer, but this should definitely be a UK legal knife. But be sure to check that yourself and don't take my word for it. But one thing I am very fond of is the feel of this knife. Again, the very thick handle and very smoothed edges make this a very, very nice fit in the hand. This little groove here, right under the tang and right by the bolster, makes for an incredibly solid and secure grip. This is not a knife that I'd be afraid of using, even despite its admittedly very shiny appearance. I'd actually be more worried about the handle than anything else, as like I said, it is easy to scratch. I don't typically do this, but I will also showcase the talk on this knife. The walk is not very loud, but quite solid. The talk is quite a bit snappier, and it does land directly in line with the spring, so very well done there. And this is, of course, a dished knife, so you can see the liners are not warped, but intentionally molded around the cover to ensure that the cover sits flat and there aren't any gaps between the two. But that does lead, as you can tell, to this fairly large gap in the center. Now, when I saw this, I was debating sending the knife back, as while this knife was significantly cheaper than a Taylor's Eyewitness knife usually is, granted, this exact model is 142 Great British pounds with the file work, this knife was, without discount, 175 Canadian dollars without the file work. But even so, and I did get a 10% off on that, so it was, by the end of things with tax and such, it was around 167, 166. So still could have been a little bit cheaper, but at the same time, I'm not complaining, considering the general cost of these knives. But I was debating sending this back when I saw the gapping. But eventually, I just fell in love with the knife and figured I couldn't part with it. Even so, would I have liked to see it with a clean back? Of course. Am I going to condemn the knife? Absolutely not. Some other things I do like about it. As always, there is no blade play. There's no blade wrap. even with snapping it shut, which I typically don't recommend, but there is no blade wrap to be found. Centering again is perfect. The material is gorgeous. The polishing work is excellent. The stamping work is very good. It's a little bit less so on the actual tang, but I can still read it, so I'm not going to be too picky about that. But all in all, this is just a very nice, solid Barlow knife. And the handle material, I am quite in favor of recommending these to those in the knife community. I like buffalo horn, don't get me wrong. Here's the knife in buffalo horn, but in comparison, it's just so much more boring. And sometimes boring can have its advantages, but while the simplicity is nice, there isn't much when it comes to detail here, which could not be said about this. So, another thing I should mention, it is said that file work, once again in the words of Slick Slicers himself, file work covers a multitude of sins. And believe it or not, you might not think it, when I hold both of these knives up to the light, shockingly, there's almost as much gapping here as there is on the Ramshorn model. And I will attempt to showcase this with the light. You can see there is certainly some gapping there, and it's quite significant. So I'm, once again, not complaining. I've had this knife for over 2 years, and I still love it, but that is worth mentioning. File work does prevent one from seeing the gapping, but it still is there. I will also line up my Taylor's Eyewitness Barlows here, just to give a comparison. And once again, these are all hand-ground knives. And so if you see the discrepancies, for example, in the blades here, this is an earlier model by Mr. Smith, and it's a lot more angular. You can see it's very round, not rounded, but very square, very symmetrical. You can see that it's very uniform, and there's nothing wrong with that. But compared to this knife, which has this very deep swoop in the clip, you can make the assumption these were made by different people, but no, these are in fact both knives by Mr. Smith. And I definitely prefer the latter model, as it just has a lot of character that I really, really enjoy. So there are the two Barlows by Mr. Smith. We'll bring up the Slim Barlow also that he made. This one's a bit more in line with the rectangular squared off look, but you can see there it is. And we'll bring up the other Barlows. Premier Ironwood model by Lee White, which is a little bit more swoopy than the Buffalo, but still less so when compared to this Ramshorn model. And finally, while we're here, I'll bring out the basic one. I have no idea who made this. It could have been Lee White, it could have been Andrew Smith, or it could have even been Denise Pettigrew, who I have yet to acquire a knife from, at least a signed knife from, but this is their basic budget hardwood model, which unfortunately is not available at Fenderhahn. And that is one of my main complaints with the company. I adore their service in general. They have excellent shipping time. The discounts that you get with the point system is very, very helpful when you're making purchases on more expensive knives like these. And their selection is very good, admittedly, but I will say that is my main complaint. The selection is limited once you start really collecting these. And that isn't to say they still don't have a good selection, as I think they do. But the main thing that they stock is actually twin blade knives. In fact, if you want almost any variety of Taylor's Eyewitness Barlow or Slim Barlow, you can get it with the double-bladed variety. If you want a double-bladed version of this in Ironwood, they have it. If you want it in mother of pearl, they have it. Ramhorn, oxhorn, buffalo horn, they have you covered. Do you want a Barlow in buffalo horn, ram's horn, ironwood, or mother of pearl with the second pen blade? Well, they have all of that. And, all things considered, the prices are reasonable. But unfortunately, if you want, say, the serpentine pen knives, the Stockmans, the equal end pen knives, the Lambfoots, the pruners, or just any of the single blade slim Barlows in anything other than desert ironwood and buffalo horn, you are out of luck. So that is my main thing. I doubt anyone at Fendrihon is watching this, but if they happen to be, please, this brand sells very well. They're always going out of stock, so expand your selection. I think it would be very good for both the consumer and for the seller. But anyway, we'll start taking these out of the way. So overall, I am very impressed with this knife, even though I was originally not. And I guess that just goes to show that maybe I'm an unreliable reviewer. Perhaps I'm willing to accept that possibility, but I can only provide you with the experiences that I hold myself, and if I happen to be a bit inconsistent, well, I apologize for that, but it bothers me too sometimes. But really, when I first saw this, I immediately was very taken with the Ramshorn, and I adored that blade shape. Then I saw the gapping, was considering sending it back, and there is gapping also, I should mention, at the base. But I was considering sending it back, but then I remembered that this knife had gapping, and I didn't complain about that, just because it was better hidden. So really, at the end of the day, I still think this is a perfectly acceptable knife. I might not use it out of fear of scratching it, but this is certainly a user. Strong spring, made in Sheffield, decent enough steel, nice handle, very comfortable in the hand, should be UK legal, would make for an excellent conversation starter, and if you're not going to use it, that handle alone would make it a very nice collection piece, which is probably what I'm going to keep it for. Either that or carrying it for a nicer occasion. But all in all, Mr. Andrew Smith, you're doing good. Maybe not quite perfect yet, but I can understand with a handmade craft like this, it will take time to perfect. So I am very much impressed with this piece. I think that it was a good buy on my end. And for the price, I really can't say that I feel like I wasted money. I'm very happy with this knife. Happy to have another Taylor's Eyewitness in the collection, and another Barlow at that. So, thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Slick Slicers for giving me the various terms that I use throughout the video. Please go check him out. Wonderful channel, and he is, I believe what they'd say, like a purveyor of knife porn, but in the meantime, if you're interested in that, go check him out. He's got a wonderful collection and just generally good reviews. So, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Taylor's Eyewitness Ramshorn Barlow from the Premier Collection, and this is the Knife Raven. As always, signing off. Goodbye.